Who's actually read a bit and knows a bit about Jerry Weinberg? So a fair few of you don't. Those of you who don't, thanks for coming. Okay, an act of faith. In case it's not obvious, the gentleman on your left is Jerry Weinberg, and I'm on the right. Yeah? So as I was sitting there waiting to start, I was just looking at that picture, and I noticed a couple of things. So he's wearing a nice bright shirt, whereas I'm wearing actually the same shirt as this one here, which is not the same shirt, the same style of shirt, I should say. Okay. The other thing I noticed is he's got something in his pocket there, a piece of paper. We'll come back to that later. I also notice that all my hair is black, whereas now, not so much. Yeah? It's quite an old photo, that. Nowadays, I'm 34 years old, and you know, you get more and more white hair. Do you think I look good for 34? It's in hex. As you get older, using hex becomes much more attractive. And the other thing I notice is I've got a lanyard there. So this was at a conference that Jerry Weinberg ran for many years, and it was called, you can just see a couple of the words almost, Amplifying Your Effectiveness. He was very precise in his thinking and his speaking, obviously because those two things are reflections of each other. And he was equally precise in his choice of the words that, for example, he chose for the name of that conference, one of his conferences. So he quite deliberately used the word effectiveness there rather than efficiency. Because for him, efficiency was something that you talk about when you're talking about machines, and effectiveness was something that you talk about when you're talking about people. And that was, broadly, that spectrum was the spectrum of software, which is what we all know and love, and we find, hopefully, you find as interesting as I do. There's a few other things maybe we'll look at, but enough of the first slide. So, in no particular order, we'll talk about this lesson that I learned initially from one of Jerry's books, which is called The Secrets of Consulting, which is probably his most famous book. I think it's fair to say. Probably, it's certainly the most, he told me it was his best-selling book. So let's do it with a story. Let's suppose I'm the manager of a company called the Dundee Fruitcake Company. And we make a fruitcake, and it's a really, really excellent fruitcake. It's got lots and lots of fruit in it. We've been going for over 100 years. We're on all the continents. We've got major factories in all the continents. We sell a huge amount of these cakes, and we make about, let's say, £50 million a year. And one of my middle managers comes up to me. He says, "John, I've had a really great idea. I've been down on the factory floor, the bakery floor where we actually bake the cakes, and I've looked at what we do, and I've looked at the cherries in particular. I was looking at the cherries. If you look carefully, you can see there's some red cherries there. And he says, the number of cherries per cake on average is 9. And my idea is I'm going to reduce the number of cherries from 9 to 8 so that we can actually obviously buy less cherries. Now, it doesn't sound much, 1 cherry per cake, but remember, we sell a hell of a lot of these cherries, of the cakes, and the cherries are in the cakes. It's one of the ingredients. So over the course of a year, this is going to save us £50,000 worth of cherries just by doing this one thing. But I'm a bit smarter than the average dog, so I say to him, hang on, this is no good. It might be a good idea, but it might not be a good idea because you're changing the recipe. And if people taste the difference, because you've reduced the quality, as it were, very slightly, they might buy less cakes than we're currently selling, and you're actually going to lose me money, right? But he's a really smart guy, my middle manager. He says, I've already thought of that. I'm ahead of you. I made up 2 batches of dough to make the cakes on the bakery, and it was a double-blind taste test that we did, properly scientific double-blind taste test. 1 batch of the dough with 9 cherries, 1 batch of the dough with 8 cherries. The people running the experiment didn't know which was which. The people tasting the cakes didn't know which was which. You cannot tell the difference. It absolutely cannot be done. It's impossible to tell the difference. And there's no tricks involved. That is a genuine statement of fact. And so the question would be, should I, as the top man, take the £50,000, or maybe share it with him because he's had the idea, and we get £25,000 each? Any thoughts? No tricks. It's a genuine double-blind taste test. Take the money. That's what I probably would do until I'd learned about this from Jerry, and then I'd think a little bit more deeply. Because one of the things that he was kind of a running thread through quite a lot of his topics is the essence of time. I actually did an interview with him once, and I asked him about time, and he said, I never mess with time. We could talk about that, but we haven't got time. Now, do you remember I said that this is a 100-years-old company? Yeah? Maybe you were listening carefully, maybe not. It's a 100-year-old company, and we used to be really, really well known for this Dundee fruitcake, known the world over. Now, but these days, it's perhaps not quite so well known the world over. And I've actually done a bit of history, and I've looked back through the 106 years that we've been going as a company, and I've discovered on 19 separate occasions, a middle manager has come up to the then boss and had this basic same idea. You know, that we can take the flour, let's say, or the sugar, and we can have a slightly reduced quality of sugar or flour or whatever it might be. And on 18 previous occasions, the top boss has said, no, but what about if you change the recipe and people don't buy as many? And on 18 separate occasions, the middle manager said, no, I'm ahead of you. I've had 2 batches made up of the dough. We've done a double-blind taste test. You cannot tell the difference. And every single time that is true. Right? And this has happened, as I say, over a period of time, which unless you're on the ball, you won't see. And the net result is, if you took the original recipe from the original cake over 100 years ago and the recipe from now, you wouldn't need a taste test. You could smell the difference. Right? So, this is called, it's got 2 names, but in that story, it was the decomposition fallacy. Colloquially, it's the idea that no difference plus no difference equals no difference. Mathematically, that is true, right? But we are people, we're complex, there's time involved, and so it's a fallacy. No difference plus no difference very, very quickly equals a clear, clear difference. Now, you might take that in a negative sense, but it's equally possible to take it in a positive sense. That would be the composition aspect of the dual nature of the name. For example, you're doing a piece of coding and you see a very small refactoring that you can do, the tiniest possible small refactoring. You see a space somewhere where there shouldn't be a space. Most of the code, semicolon at the end of the line, but one line, end of the line, and then a space, and then a semicolon. Should you do it? Should you fix that one tiny, tiny little thing? The answer is the same answer as I've just given you. Yes or no, depending on your point of view. Yeah? But with a deeper perspective of time, I do these things all the time now. Any tiny little refactoring that I see, as long as I'm backed up with tests, I just do it. I don't even think about it. I do it because very, very, very quickly these accumulate very, very rapidly. Okay? So that's the first one. That's called the composition fallacy. The next one. Sticking with the theme of food, supposing I eat a donut, what happens to my blood sugar level? Not a trick question, it goes up. What happens if it goes up unchecked? It's on the slide. You get hyperglycemia, you die pretty damn quick. Okay? Now that doesn't happen in a healthy mammalian body. Why? The answer is basically because we are the result of 4.5 billion years of destructive testing, right? Yeah? There are some cells in the pancreas, I forget what their name is, but they detect the increase in glucose, and that's their trigger to secrete insulin. So the amount of insulin in your blood goes up. The liver and muscles detect that, and that's their trigger to take the glucose here. Is there a pointer on this thing? Yes, detect the glucose and store it in its stored form in the liver and muscles called glycogen, which has the natural effect of reducing the amount of glucose in your bloodstream, and so the blood sugar level goes down and you don't get hyperglycemia. But what happens if your blood sugar level goes down unchecked. Yep, you still die just as quickly, but it's technically through hypoglycemia rather than hyperglycemia. Yeah? Notice in both cases we've used the word checked. If the system is unchecked. Yeah? There's a strong time with Scrum there if you read the literature. But again, we haven't got time to go into that. This, again, doesn't happen for the same reasons. Some different cells in the pancreas detect this. They secrete a different molecule in this case. It's called glucagon. Liver muscles also detect that, and that's their trigger to reverse this process and put the stored glucose back into its regular glucose form. Yes? And this all happens under the hood, as it were. We can't see this, but this is just one example in living systems of, and there's thousands and thousands of examples in living systems of what is called Le Chatelet's law. Le Chatelet, French name, I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing it right. If you search for him on the internet, you'll only find black and white pictures of him. This has been known a long time. And to paraphrase, the Chatelet's law says that stable systems tend to oppose their own proper function. Now, I must be honest and say when I first read about this, I didn't get it. I was much younger in my defense, okay? And I think possibly looking back, the reason was because of the words proper. They're opposing their own proper function. Doesn't seem quite right. If it's proper, why are you opposing it, okay? But I feel I have a deeper understanding of this now, not least due to a friend of mine called Hubert, who I chatted with one day. The point here is that there's a tremendous amount of activity happening in this loop, and there's a tremendous amount of activity happening in this loop. We can't see it, but it's happening all the time. All the time there's this fight between these two systems against each other, constantly against each other, active, fighting against each other, fighting. Why all this activity? The answer is to keep something else the same, right? And that's a really deep, beautiful idea, paradoxical idea. And again, it's a common theme. Whenever there is something that is staying constant in this crazy world that we live in, you can be pretty damn sure that there are other things fighting to keep it constant. Not always, but it's a useful rule of thumb. Yeah? And this is the way things are actually built on top of each other. There's a level of activity to create stability. And from that stability, you can create another level of activity, which raises kind of the abstraction layer all the time. Okay? So I love the deep beauty in this, and I love the paradox, and I think Jerry would really have loved this as well, because he really liked paradox. He understood that a paradox, when you see a paradox and you start to understand a paradox, it's a clue that you're starting to really probe in and get a deep truth about something that's happening underneath the system. Yeah? If you read some of his books, and he wrote many, he was a prolific writer, then you'll read about this idea of paradox quite a lot. Okay. So the next little thing, I create an online tool called Cyber Dojo. Anyone heard of it? Yeah, a few people. Slightly more each time I ask, which is encouraging. And it enables you to practice programming. It's open source. It's got a license if you're using it commercially. Non-commercial use is free. All the money, as it says, goes towards a charity I've set up. We basically buy Raspberry Pis and try and get them to children who would find them useful, although it's sometimes really hard to get them to the places where they need to get to. We got some stuck in a shipment trying to get to Malawi at the moment. I think it is. Is it Malawi? Pretty sure it's Malawi. Anyway. And I've tried to apply some of the lessons that Jerry taught me, both personally and from his books, and his blogs as well, in Cyber Dojo. And the most important lesson in that respect is that it's designed for groups. You can use Cyber Dojo to practice individually, and if you do that, you'll more or less be working like most people program when they're programming in a job, with a deadline typically, to finish something, right? It's not a very good IDE, but it's pretty similar, okay? No, that's just kind of an extra thing that you get for free in terms of the implementation. Really why I built this was this one here, that we're doing it as a group. And this is a typical dashboard of a group of 6 laptops, which probably means there's 12 people. Yeah, because I really try and encourage pairing. And so, briefly to explain, each of these columns is a minute. Yeah? Red and green has the normal meanings of TDD. Yeah? I invented amber, which means it doesn't compile. There's a slightly different red. I figured it's there. Red and green traffic light. The poor little amber was saying, what about me? Kind of thing, right? Yeah? And a summary on the right-hand side, 22 times this animal here, which is a fox, has pressed the test button, and a pie chart showing you the rough percentages of the reds, ambers, and greens. And another important aspect of this design is that this is a fox. There's no login. Yeah? There are actually 64 animals in the system, so you could have 64 laptops participating in a virtual dojo at the same time if you wanted to. And this idea of anonymity, apart from what I think is a really nice idea of not having to go through that faff of logging in, right? Yeah? When all I want to do is something else, is very important. Why? There's a number of reasons, but there's one reason above all others. Feedback. Yeah? Because if we click on any of these traffic lights, we actually see what that animal did at that moment. We get a view of all of the source code for that animal at that moment, and we see the diff of what they did. They were at green, and they did something, and they got to amber. Okay? Whatever it might be. And the reason I built CyberDojo was that review system. Yeah? Because everyone gets to see what everyone's done. And I was doing this last year sometime in Ireland for a group in Galway, and after we'd done a little session like this, one of the guys came up to me, he said, John, he said, that was great, and he said, one of the things about that is there's, quote, nowhere to hide, unquote. I thought, what a great phrase, yeah? Because almost you're not teaching them anything. You're literally just showing them what they're doing, yeah? But that is part of the starting of the feedback, right? Because, to use a different quote from another one of my favorite authors, John Gall, who wrote the Systems Bible, okay? You know how sometimes someone says something or writes something, and it's just the right thing at just the right moment, and it sort of dings a bell in your head? Yeah, that was a moment for me. And his quote in his book was, it's not feedback unless it's fed back. Right? It's about steering. Yeah? Simple, effective, really rang a bell for me. So, many things I do, I try and at least think about, is this idea of, am I doing this based on the idea of an individual, or am I doing this based on the idea of a team? And it needs to be team. If you're doing stuff in a group, yeah, you need to manage that group as a group and not as a bunch of separate individuals. And yet, that is what we do. How do we pay them? Individually. Yeah? How do we do assessments? Individually. How do we interview for them? Individually. Yeah? How many of them are there? 9. How many laptops have we got? 9. Okay? Something to think about. And this is old stuff. Jerry looked at this, I was going to say 1971, but actually he wrote this book in 1969. The Psychology of Computer Programming, an acknowledged classic. He wrote it in 69. It took him 2 years to find a publisher who published it. And if there's a book about software that's been continuously in print longer than this book, I don't know what it is. Okay? Right at the beginning of the book, he says, and I'm going to do the thing you're never supposed to do, read from a slide, but I'm going to do it, right? We must deal with one other problem which is important because of a seldom questioned view of programming, a view which this book will spend a great deal of time questioning. That view is that programming is an individual activity, which it isn't. For anything of any scale and any consequence, it has to be a team-based activity. Let's look at a couple of other quotes while we're here. If egoless programming is used, everyone in the group will have the opportunity to, pardon the underlining, that's not deliberate, that's because it's pasted from a blog that's got hyperlinks, sorry, okay. Opportunity to examine the work of everyone else. You see that theme? Examine the work of everyone else, yeah, at some time, thereby tending to prevent the establishment of a strong hierarchy. Yeah, so to kind of state the obvious, although again, I have to be honest, it wasn't obvious to me, do you want a team or do you want a hierarchy? They're not the same, right? One of the ways you can combat the natural tendency of a human-based system to form a hierarchy, because it's totally natural. No one's maliciously trying to come up with a bureaucratic system. It's just natural, okay, is to, again, think about this of doing things at the team level. Simple idea, exposing the work of everyone to everyone else. And hence, trying to get a team, or to state it in its negative sense, trying to not get a hierarchy, okay? Here's a little one about the idea that I mentioned just a moment ago. We take it as read, everyone has their own laptop when they join a company. Why? Doesn't have to be that way, right? If you've got 9 people on the team, why not have 8 laptops or 8 stations? At least one person has to pair all the time then, probably, or something like that, okay? These are useful ideas. Because machines are rigid, the people who use them must, if they are to be successful, supply more than their share of flexibility. And again, there's that spectrum of what we have to do as software developers. We have to bridge the gap from the machine, binary, yeah, no context, black and white, noughts and ones, literally, all the way across to human beings, which is the opposite of that spectrum, yeah? So software development is a really difficult thing. Yeah, we shouldn't beat ourselves up too badly if we don't make a great job of it every time, because it really, really is I think, one of the most difficult things that we do. If you think about it, it's kind of a miracle that we can do it at all. We haven't evolved to have the level of precision that you need to write software. Yeah? I saw someone a while ago saying a summary of evolution was number 1, crave sugar. So there's that glucose cycle again. Okay? If anyone's got kids, they know about the craving of the sugar, right? Okay? And the other one was avoiding tigers. Yeah? Nothing to do with software. How recent is software in human history? It's crazy. Okay. So that's just a very quick look at this book, Psychology of Computer Programming. Moving on, a couple of last stories, because I'm planning to sort of finish before an hour and we have some time for questions and answers, hopefully. It's 1958. Jerry Weinberg is obviously a much younger man at that point, because he died last year, sadly. And he worked for IBM. And NASA decided that they were going to start the Mercury mission. So if some of you are quite young in the room, you might, even with your youngness, have read about a thing called the Apollo missions, right? Yeah? So the Apollo missions was to send a man to the moon and bring them back safely. Important to bring them back safely, yes? But before you can do that, other things have to be in place. So the whole program before Apollo was called Mercury. Really, really great Project Mercury. Lots of the astronauts who are in that wrote little books, which I recommend. The esprit de corps in that project just reads like it was astonishing. But the thing is, even before Mercury, when they weren't trying to get to the moon and the back, they were simply trying to do a geostationary orbit, okay? They realized something, that you can't, well, they realized that up until that point, no human being had been in space going as fast as they would be going in space, because on Earth, the fastest you can go is not very fast, okay? Right? Why does that matter? It matters because things were going that fast in a geostationary orbit, and Einstein's relativity kicks in, and there are relative effects, right? So you have to actually build a space tracking network on Earth before you can safely put a man or anything in orbit and actually track it with sufficient accuracy. And so NASA kind of realized this, and they put out a tender, meaning they want people to bid to build the space tracking network, and 101 tenders were submitted. 2 of them were from IBM. Everyone else submitted 1 tender. IBM submitted 2. They submitted 1, which was the same as all the other ones, but they submitted 1 that was different. And the reason it was different was because Jerry Weinberg read the tender, and is so often the case even with software, they didn't state the problem, they stated the solution. They started to actually bake the solution into what they wanted you to build. And he has a very, very strong physics background, had a very strong physics background, and he realized it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work, all right? So he went to his bosses and they said this. What do you think the bosses said? They said, no, you bid like everyone else, right? That's what they want. You give them what they want, right? And he knew it was just nuts. So one of the things that characterizes Jerry Weinberg is courage. He was such a courageous person. He fought and he fought and he fought and he fought. And eventually IBM relented and they said, we're not going to get rid of this first thing. this first tender, but we will allow you to submit a second tender, yeah, where you put your supposed ideas about why that isn't going to work, and here's my alternative solution, which I think will work. And that won. The second tender won. And to his dying day, he told me he never found out whether NASA deliberately did that as part of their tender process to find out if people actually knew what they were doing. Okay? I guess it depends on whether you think humans are that level of cleverness. Okay, so moving on. Then they won the DAM contract, then they had to build the space tracking network. How do you do that? Well, it's again, basically the problem resolves around what's the time. You need to have clocks in the separate locations across the world that are doing the tracking, yeah, with obviously the kit that's doing the tracking, across separate locations in the world. And all of those separate locations have to have the same time, to more accuracy than human beings had ever needed up until that point. How do you know if they've got the same time? It's a really difficult problem, okay? Because obviously, if you're in Australia and I'm here, and you tell me what the time is in Australia, that isn't, when I receive the information of what time you thought it was, okay, that isn't that time. Time's moved on because it took a while for that information to get here. And that information was traveling at what speed? Pretty fast, right? Okay. Yeah, even in those days, you know, it still was traveling along copper wires, right? Yeah. And up until that point, human beings hadn't faced that problem. So what did they do? They built 3 multiples. Well, in Houston, they built 3 multiples of every single atomic clock. I think it was 5 locations they needed to build tracking stations for. And so they built 15 atomic clocks in Houston that were all in the same place, and they could verify they were all telling the same time. And then they took 3 of them and sent them to Australia, but not by plane. That would have been too fast. They put them on literally a slow boat to Australia, right? Yeah, and then they took another 3 over here, and another 3 over here, and another 3 over here. And when they got them, they unwrapped them, and they looked at the atomic clocks in the 3, and even by then, drift had happened, but 2 of them was telling the same time, and statistically that was good enough, and so they took that as the time. And now they had enough statistical confidence that all of the locations had an atomic clock that was telling the same time. Yeah? Then they could start to build the network. Right? They were doing stuff people had never done before. Imagine that. Yeah? Now, that's not quite the end of the story. We could go on, but like I said, I do want to stop to allow time for questions, because NASA had bought the big mainframe computer from IBM, and they put it in their building at Houston. But before that happened, Jerry again said to the managers at IBM, he says, again, it's about time. If you know anything about hardware, you'll know that they have clocks, very accurate clocks in them. I'm not sure about the details, but I think they have some kind of crystal, and then they fire electricity, they pass an electric current through the crystal, and it oscillates at a certain frequency, okay? Well, it does now, yeah, but this is 1958, 1959, remember, okay? They weren't quite that sophisticated. No one had needed clocks that accurate, and so surprise, surprise, I think it was the 508, I can't remember exactly, but the mainframe computer that you could buy from IBM that lots of people had bought, okay, didn't have a sufficiently accurate clock. And so Jerry found out about this, because again, he had a physics background, and he went to the managers and he said, the clock isn't going to work. What do you think they said? They said, don't make a fuss, right? And so, what did he do? Remembering he had courage. He got a couple of mates together, and I kid you not, they broke into the factory which held the mainframes, and after they built the correct accuracy clock, and they put it in the damn mainframe. Okay? But unfortunately, they made a mistake. They put it in the wrong mainframe. Right? And so someone got a free clock with unbelievable accuracy, and NASA didn't get one. So what did they do? What did he do? He broke into NASA's 508, and he put another one in that one. Okay? These are the kinds of things that happen when you're doing something that no one has ever done before. Okay? If you want to make it work. It reminds me a little bit of something that Jeff Sutherland said one time when he was speaking. He said, at some points in your life, you have a choice between being someone or doing something. And that really spoke to me. Yeah? So, that's all I had sort of planned roughly in my head. How are we doing for time?
We have half an hour.
Excellent. So I'm just going to take this off because it's getting in the way. I'm going to try and take it off. Maybe I can't actually take it off.
It's a little bit more tricky.
Yeah.
Expected, but
It's coupling, see?
done.
Yes, thanks.
All right, questions?
So actually, yeah, now I think about it, anyone notice anything about my lanyard, I think they're called, aren't they?
Pen?
Another lesson from Jerry, okay? I think what we're going to do in this session is, this last half-hour sessions, I'm actually going to try and be Jerry, in the sense that I'm going to try and think like Jerry and answer the way I think Jerry would have answered when you ask questions, okay? So, Jerry was a consultant, software consultant for many, many companies after he left NASA. And in his books, if you read about software, he says the two most important things as a software consultant when you're visiting a new company are number one, accurate listening. Listening to what they're saying. Because at that point, that's the only clue you've got to how they're thinking. Yeah? And the second thing is accurate observation. He wrote a whole book, in fact, the number 4 in the series of 4 about quality systems management, yeah, which is about observation. So let's try and observe carefully.
You got a pencil around it?
A pen.
Yeah.
I've got a pen on there.
Different color than I have on the bottom.
Oh, is it a different color?
Yeah, a little bit.
Oh, you see, that's excellent. It says speaker on it. What does yours say? Conference. Don't like that. I don't like that at all. I would, if I was you, I would give some feedback to DDD and say, everyone should have the same color badge. Really? You can there's deep reasons for that, okay, which we can go into later, if you want, over a beer, okay? Why do I have a pen? Why does Jerry have a piece of paper in his pocket? One of the things he taught me was always carry a pen and paper. I cannot tell you how valuable that is. So let's start to get a bit of feedback going. I notice we have a scribe in the room. Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, would you mind being our scribe, Michelle, just for a while?
Sure.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. It might all go terribly, but let's see. Yeah. And you can do the fancy writing, not the fancy writing, the fancy pictures as well if you want.
Okay.
But basically, let's just start with that idea of, again, let's try and be accurate. It's very important to be accurate. What did I say? Always carry a pen and paper. That's what I said.
Is it whiteboard?
Yeah. You don't have to wait for me to write. You can
Okay, so anyone got any thoughts about that idea? Oh, hang on, no, Jerry wouldn't do this. Jerry wouldn't do this. He would start. He would do something else first, okay? Because what's happening now is that I'm doing something quite dangerous. I'm trying to elicit feedback from a group of people that, with one exception, I don't actually know very well, okay? And one of his fundamental laws, it's the first law in his book of the consulting book, The Secrets of Consulting, is never offer feedback unless you've been asked for it. It doesn't work. I mean, you can do it. It just doesn't work, okay? So you have to understand the context here. I'm going to ask you questions, and I really want you to reply, but you have to understand that when you reply, you are kind of opening yourself up in the sense that we are going to look at what you actually say, and we're going to examine it possibly in more detail than you've ever experienced before. All right? So what I'm saying is you don't have to answer. I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot here, right? You don't have to answer. Everything is optional. That's another of Jerry's fundamental rules. There's no coercion to do anything. Again, you can do it. It just doesn't work. It's not effective. Okay? So, that's what he would have said first. Okay? So, but we're still back to the question. Let's rewind. I said, always carry a pen and paper. That's something I learned from Jerry. Okay? I've got the paper here in my pocket. Okay? Any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I have a phone.
I have a phone, okay? Write it down.
What? I have a phone.
I have a phone.
In what context?
No,
I'm
no,
sorry. Shall we do the mic?
Whoa. We first have to make sure we capture what was actually said before we start probing in it and trying to destroy this poor gentleman, okay? Right?
John,
Yeah?
shall we try to get the mic so we can get recording right? Or
We can do that as well, but we actually have it written as well.
Okay.
That's a good idea. So, I have a phone is probably the first thought I would have had, actually, if I'd been asked this question. Yeah? Well, I also have a phone, and yet I still carry a pen and paper. Why?
Is it easier to write on a paper than on a phone?
Well, was it easier? That was what was said. I'll try and remember to repeat the questions because we're being filmed, okay? If I forget to repeat the question, remind me to repeat the question, okay? I think the answer to that, one of the answers to that is that what's easier for you depends largely on what you've done the most of. If you are like my daughters, you've got a phone, then the rate at which they can text is just utterly phenomenal, okay? Yes? So there's absolutely no question my daughters could both text stuff faster than I could actually scribe it with a pen and paper using old-fashioned technology, okay? But it's a good thought. Why do I choose deliberately not to put things in a phone in that mechanism, okay? I use a pen and paper.
Phones are distracting. Phones are distracting, whereas paper isn't.
Okay, so the answer was phones are distracting, whereas paper isn't. Well, I think I agree with you in the sense that if I was doing this talk and 9 times during the talk people's damn phone had gone off, I would be distracted, okay? But you didn't do that. You were all very polite. I'm sure you've all got lots of phones on you, but you turned them off, okay? So phones can be distracting. But it's a really good answer. Let's push on that a bit more, okay? Let's actually try and do what Jerry talked about in terms of experiential learning. It's not enough to know something in theory. You have to actually know something with your fingers. You have to actually do it. There are some things you can only discover by actually doing them, not because you're dumb or stupid, okay? It's just that's the nature of the beast, all right? We don't call it development for no reason, right? It's called development because our understanding of what we're doing develops as we go along. You don't want the system perfect at the beginning. You want it perfect at the end because you've developed an understanding, okay? So let's try it. Has anyone got a phone? Have you got a phone on you, Michelle?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So let's imagine you've got that phone. Let me just take those off you for a second. And I'm going to say something to you. Always carry a pen and paper. And you think, oh, that's an interesting idea. I'd like you to capture it on a phone. Go on.
Okay.
Okay, you can stop. All right? Right? And there's your pen back. Thanks a lot. Okay. So what did you see?
It's not effective. You need
What did you see? Don't tell me an opinion. What did you see?
He had to do many
Excellent. He had to fiddle around. Would you log in to some kind of login, was it?
Yeah.
There's login again, right? Yes, okay. Anyone else notice anything?
It takes time.
It did. Definitely it took time. But it takes me a little bit of time to get my pen out and my paper, right? But the paper never goes flat. The battery in the paper never runs out, okay? But that's a different thing. What did you see else? Did anyone else see anything?
he turned away from me.
He turned away from me. And he didn't actually turn away from me like this, right? No. But he did do what?
Excuse himself.
He did.
He looked away.
He looked down at his phone. We'd broken eye contact. Until that moment, yeah, we had really strong eye contact. But for some instinctive reason, when he started to do stuff on the phone, it lowered, okay? So, I mean, you could argue this is something that's more or less true for paper or for pen, okay? So, again, there's lots of interesting avenues we could explore here. But my experience is that when I'm with a group of people and I start writing something with a paper and pen, it's quicker and it's much easier to maintain eye contact and to maintain really high communication with the person that you're speaking to. Okay?
As far as I'm concerned, it's also a question of body language. If you're writing something on paper, everyone knows what you're doing. If you're on your phone, you don't.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a really good interpretation again.
Maybe you're tweeting.
Maybe you're tweeting, yes, exactly. He probably statistically is most of the time, right? Yeah. Right? Yeah?
Okay, how am I going to write that? I lose contact? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Okay, let's... how much time have we got?
Well, plenty. 20 minutes.
20 minutes, good. I'm just thinking whether to carry on with this one or to do a different one. No, let's carry on with this one. Let's see where it takes us. I'm going to lose my voice in a minute, though, so that first of all, I'm going to get a drink. Any other comments from anyone?
I think it was a good example of we gravitate to the phone because it's a general purpose tool, but as we saw, because it's general purpose, it's not optimal for the thing that you would carry the pen and paper for.
I love it.
It is single purpose and optimal for that purpose.
I love it.
Smartphones are even not optimal for phoning.
So let's capture this. You know, optimal for purpose, and let's think about that carefully, okay? How optimal is writing with a pen and paper? With a black or blue pen, biro, on white paper?
Extremely.
You wouldn't believe how optimal it is, okay? There's all kinds of physics going on with the way paper is involved and the way it diffracts light when light hits it, okay? To make it really, really, really good. Paper's been around much longer than phones, okay? Right? So that's one thing.
You can also draw.
You can draw, okay? Yes, possibly. Although, of course, you could take a photo of what you've written on the paper.
Using the phone.
Yes, using the phone. Okay, let's... there was another thought that flashed through my mind there. Why am I writing it down in the first place? Whatever it is.
You want to catch the idea.
I want to catch the idea. Yeah?
When you write down, you can memorize it better.
You can. There's studies have been actually done about when you, excuse me, when you capture information like this, yeah, text-based, phone-based, that mechanism, okay, or when you do it with a cursive scribe in whatever language is your language, okay, just a human language, okay, on paper, yeah, and lots of experiments have been done to see, you know, things like how much retention. Do you get better retention with one than the other? And the answer is absolutely clear. Yes, you get better retention. It goes in your head better if you do it like that. Okay? Now, you could spend ages saying, well, that's because you grew up doing it that way. Yeah? And the little kiddies these days, when they grow up, they're going to do it better with the phone because they will grow up by the phone, possibly. Okay? Yeah? There's all kinds of contexts involved.
That's probably the reason why iPad Pro got a pen after all this fancy experiments. Right?
That's right.
The pen is back.
The pen is back. Do you remember one of the very first presentations that Steve Jobs did? When he pretended that the iPhone, it was the representation of the first iPhone, he pretended it was going to have a pen. Yeah, do you remember that? Anyone remember that? And it didn't have a pen, it was a finger, because you could do scrolling. That was the first time you could do scrolling like that. Yeah, and many people, that was why they bought the iPhone. It was the scrolling, so you could do that. Yeah? Okay. Let's look at the words, always carry a pen and paper, although you didn't put A. That's interesting. How many pens do you think I carry?
2.
At least 2. Okay? I've got some in my laptop bag here. Why? Obvious reasons, they run out. No. Their battery, in effect, that's right, okay. There's another word, there's only like 5 words in that phrase, but there's one word that, now I look at it carefully, stands out as well.
Always.
Always. Yeah? And in fact, now I think about it, it actually stands out even more than I first thought because you've actually written it in caps. Yeah? Ah, look what you've done. You smart boy. You see, I hadn't noticed that. Ah. Now, I think you've read a little bit of Jerry's stuff, haven't you?
No,
No, you haven't.
not at all. I was counting on you.
Hold your hand out. No, like this. Smack. Okay. No, I mean, to be fair, he doesn't because I expect you read my blog instead. Anyway, that's a different question. But the reason it caught my eye and my ear and my sense was this is an example of something we saw on one of the slides, paradox. Always and never, obviously, are dualities, opposites of each other, and that has the sense of creating a truth, a deep truth, or a paradox, yes? So this is something that I've actually blogged about because I created one of my own laws. Jerry had lots of laws in his book, mostly in The Secrets of Consulting. We've only seen 2, okay? I really strongly urge you to get it. It's such a great book. You know how sometimes, you know how you could get 10 books and they're all fairly good and you read them all one time? Or you could get a really good book, and it's a really good book and you read it 10 times. It's that kind of book, okay? I've read it 6 times, and each time I read it, I get something new because there's a depth of knowledge and experience in there, and you're a different person. Obviously, you've evolved and you've grown and you've matured and evolved, and you see things that you didn't see before, which is just a natural consequence, okay? So I try and make my own laws, mimicking what Jerry did in his book, okay? And one of my laws is called, so I haven't got a great name for it. At the moment, I'm calling it the Bill Bailey Law for a reason we won't go into, okay? Or maybe we will.
The what?
Bill Bailey Law. No, I mean, I will tell you why. There was a TV program in the UK many years ago where Bill Bailey, who was a UK comedian, went around various places and met various interesting people, and they just filmed it. At one time, he was in a zoo in Chile, I think it was, and there was a big cat enclosure with, panthers and things like that inside the enclosure. And he was with the keeper who was responsible for these panthers. And the keeper was obviously from Chile, and his English was fairly broken. And before they went into it wasn't native, but it was better than Bill's Chilean, if Chilean is a language. Is that a language? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, right, yeah. And before they went in, the guy from Chile who was the keeper, he says, as they go in, he says, never look at the panthers. That's what he said. Never look at the panthers. It's a safety thing, okay? So they start going, they open the door and they go into come in with me. We go in together, okay, right, okay? And they get in and they close the door behind them. And they've been in a short while. And then the keeper turns to them, he says, and while they're doing this, Bill Bailey's like this, right? Because these like big panthers walking around and stuff, right? And he's like this, he's not looking at them kind of thing, like this is a safety thing. And the keeper turns to him, he says, oh no, my English bad. Always look at the panthers. So my law is never believe any assertion containing the words never or always. Right? So do you believe that law? What's the deeper law? Obviously that's just humorous law, but what's the deeper law there? What's the law actually trying to tell you? Well, possibly, but that's...
But that contains everything.
Yeah.
Or, no, it was never and always. Sorry.
Right, but you're on the right lines.
Be critical, be skeptical.
Particularly about what?
Absolutes.
Absolutes. Okay, so it reminds me of a line from the Star Wars. Only the Sith deal in absolutes. Do you remember that line? Yeah. Which itself is quite an absolute statement if you think about it, okay? For me, the reason I wrote the law, never believe any assertion containing the words always or never, was partly to deliberately obey a paradox, yes? But to sort of try and mentally remind myself that when I'm listening to someone, and there's that spectrum of the noughts and the ones at the one end of the machines, okay, and the humans at the other end of the machine, okay, are we using, as a group, appropriate language for where we happen to be at this particular moment in time? Always is fine when you're over here, noughts and ones, okay? But if someone starts to say something like always or never, and we're not in that context, ding, okay? Once you've trained yourself, you'll recognize it, you'll hear it in that moment, okay? And then you can stop what's happening and you can literally try and replay back what has someone said to you, okay? Yeah?
I have an example of that.
Yes?
I was giving it in my talk last year, that there is an assumption that an address must always have a postal code.
Right.
And as a result of that, as you probably know, that Ireland has to introduce postal codes because every e-commerce system in the world required them to do that. And people were so upset, so the government had to take measures to actually introduce postal codes in the country, just because of stupidity of software developers that follow the rule of always have a postal code in the address.
Right. So I'll give you an example. One of the things I do as a job to earn money is consulting for various companies. And as I've said, one of the things I've learned from Jerry is the two most accurate things you do as a consultant when you start working with a new company and carrying on, but particularly at the beginning, are accurate listening and observation. Okay? So I try to say as little as possible because I want to gather the information that they're telling me. Okay? And one of the words, because again, to state the obvious, it's not just literally these two words. It's words that are synonyms of those words as well, right? So a very common synonym is impossible. Over time, if you start to get this mindset, as I have done, you start to mentally get a list of words that you're listening out for above and beyond the actual conversations that are happening. Okay? There's a meta level that's beyond that, and you're actually step by step going through the words as they come through and thinking if that helps you gain any context. Okay? So always and never are ones, okay? And synonyms for those such as impossible. So what does it mean? Let's supposing I'm trying to do something on my I've got a particular, problem that I'm trying to solve. I've got a test for my code, but the code doesn't work, and I'm trying to do it a certain way. And Michel says to me, he says, "Oh, no, you can't do it that way. That's impossible." Yeah? What does that mean? What has he actually said? What does it mean when you say that's impossible? No.
I've never been able to do that.
Go on.
And it's what?
I don't know how to do that.
Excellent. That's the first step, okay?
Can you repeat this?
I don't know how to do that. Yeah? But you've turned it round. You didn't say anything about you, right? You didn't say, I don't know how to do that. No. You've done what in psychology is called reflection. It's got a number of names, okay? Yeah? You said, that's impossible. In other words, you're stupid. You're trying to do something that's impossible, right? Yeah? And it's crazy. It's crazy when you stop to think about it. What he says when he says it's impossible is, I've searched the entire internet, right? I know all possible ways this might be doable. None of them are going to work, I promise you. That's crazy. Okay? Most of the time, that's crazy.
Probably all internet is the first page in Google.
Yes. Yeah. Something's impossible? Oh, wow. So whenever I hear someone saying to me that's impossible with one of the synonyms, okay, I think, excellent, there's a challenge. Right, yes? And pretty damn quickly we can usually find a way to fix it. Yeah? Anyone else have their own kind of words that they, now they think about it, have a similar meta level? Words that you particularly look out for when you're accurately listening to someone speak? Because it's a difficult... I couldn't do it when I started. I was utterly hopeless, okay? I was your typical geek over here with the noughts and the ones. That's all I cared about, right? Okay? Yeah, but practice. It's amazing how quickly you can do it and what a different insight it gives you. Yeah? Must. That's a nice one. Yeah? And again, to be clear, there is that spectrum of the noughts and the ones to the human beings, and sometimes some of these words are actually really quite appropriate. Yeah? But sometimes they're not. It's very much a contextual thing. So there's Bill Bailey's law. Never believe any assertion containing the words never or always. And that was kind of the thoughts in my head when I wrote that about what it actually means deeper, further down deeper, okay? Yeah. It's about listening. Trying to come up with, see if you can see someone who's talking in a paradox maybe, or who's actually stating more than they're doing, or in terms of psychology is using that idea of reflecting. Yeah. I have a phone. Okay. So how many minutes have we got left now? 4. Okay.
I have one observation that words always and never, they actually, unlike most words impossible or must, they actually involve an aspect of time which sometimes isn't visible from the first glance. Because always means that it can never happen, like involving the word never.
Right.
Impossible is kind of, it cannot be possible at all. And sometimes it's some things that aren't always or never can be sort of reversed or mitigated over time. Because when people, usually business people, they talk about now, they never talk about past or future.
Yes. Yep.
I think another danger word I'm reminded of is nothing. Oh, sorry. I'm reminded of a quote that I'm sure is attributed to Jerry, where he says nothing and plus nothing eventually adds up to something.
Exactly.
And it was just like your cherry cake story, that
Exactly.
we think it makes no difference to remove this, and then within 20 years, then there are no cherries left at all. So
Yeah. And it's a really dangerous, serious problem, because we haven't evolved to see this, right? I mean, it's only in the last 100 years that the average lifespan of a human being went beyond 35, probably, something like that. Yeah? You didn't have to worry about pensions or any of this nonsense, right? Yeah? Yeah, so if you want to see the effect over 50 years of lots and lots of small changes, it's no surprise we've got no experience of that, okay? No, of course you haven't. And this is like our future, literally. What are we doing to the planet? We're putting a little bit more CO2 into the atmosphere every single minute, every single day. I mean, individually, those molecules, individual molecules of CO2 don't actually make a difference, detectable difference. Very quickly, they do. Yeah? Really insidious problem.
That was a nice fallacy you gave us.
Thanks.
That was a nice fallacy you gave us. You said the average age of a person a couple hundred years ago or so was 35, so we don't have to care about pensions.
Yes.
Average is another such danger word.
I agree.
Because
Beautiful.
have you ever considered that the average adult back in the day grew to well over 60? It's just they had such a high rate of child deaths.
Bingo.
That-
Beautiful.
You know, the average doesn't account to anything how
I
old
agree.
people actually
Thank
got.
you for bringing it up. And thank you for accurately observing my words and reflecting them back to me, okay? Beautiful. Averages hide more information than they show. They really do. Be very, very careful about metrics if it's an average. We'll finish off with one funny little story, okay? And that's the story of the statistician who drowned crossing a river that was only 2 inches deep on average. And I think then we're out of time. Thanks for listening.